Everyone awake after lunch? Even in the corner? Good. Thank you very much, Kathy, and thank you to Carl and EdCast for facilitating my presence here. It's a really interesting event, and I'm sure we're all getting a lot out of it. But after lunch, I think it's quite timely to reinforce the international perspective and reinforce the kind of messages that we've heard from some of the international speakers already. We also have taken it upon us to particularly stress now the student perspective of this, and in recognition of this, Donna will start. Lead off in a minute. Just a few words of introduction. We've got a panel of four. They will basically speak for no more than 5 minutes, preferably 3, so it's like a kind of ultra-fast, kind of a longish elevator pitch or ultra-fast TED Talk kind of model, making a number of hopefully provocative points, especially after lunch, one needs a bit of excitement. And then we'll leave the floor open for questions, and we do want questions. Don't be bound by where you think the people come from, because they probably don't come from that country, and all of us have experience in a number of other zones. So just ask the questions, and we'll find some way of answering. And if we can't, we'll just say, well, we can't answer that. Why don't you think about it more? Just to start with, to kind of give the panel a steer, I come from the UK. I've worked for a number of so-called conventional universities. I mean, no university is conventional, is it? But there are some similarities. I also worked for the UK Open University for 25 years till they let me out, remission for good behaviour, and let me do some other things after that. What have I observed recently as I travel around Europe especially? Students are different, but they're not all different in the same way. I think that's very important to say, and I think student needs differently expressed will be a key factor in this. Institutions are different. I think I'd say more provocatively, the quasi-market isn't working. In the UK, we lost our last Minister of Education partly because his simplistic theories on the quasi-market didn't quite work so well. Like the US, we were struggling with the loan book crisis. We're about to make it worse by introducing loans to postgraduate students, as if our economy wasn't in enough problems. On the other hand, it must be a good idea in other targets. So lots of interesting issues. And yet, even within the UK, there isn't one uniform funding regime, so it's a kind of states' right issue, let alone across the rest of Europe. But even across Europe, the tradition of free education is under pressure in many ways, especially when it comes to international students and distance online learning. So Europe is actually does not speak with one voice in higher education, even if in other matters. As to the big challenges, I think there are big challenges for small providers. I've said that publicly in previous occasions. I think basically institutions will have to get larger, partly to compensate with the regulatory pressures which are increasing across the world, and partly to compensate for the increasing turbulence of the global economy and the local instantiations. That may be bad news for some institutions, maybe good news for others. But the problems we face in universities are eternal, and that's kind of reassuring. Nice to have problems, and nice that they don't change so much. But the solutions change. I guess specific points I would make in the UK, there's a hotbed of innovation in London, in Cambridge, and actually another hotbed around Edinburgh. It's not pulling through into operational systems. The number of UK companies that have global names in online learning is pretty small. The other thing I'd say is that we have a number of innovative niche providers. Some of them being innovative niche providers for 10 years. What's happened to the expansion factor? Inflation may have been the cause of the early universe. The inflation isn't going on in some of these specialist providers, even fully online. So is this market failure? Is it student cautiousness? Is it fighting off competition? Who knows? It'll be very interesting to hear about other countries. I'll now hand over to Donna.
Hi, thank you. I'm Donna. I was at the University of Texas in Austin from 2006 until a couple years ago, where I hopped off and founded a company out of Norway. I'm actually landlocked, based in Austin, Texas. You wouldn't think that we're landlocked if you watch the Weather Channel today, but in general, so I'm an American on the panel who actually does most of my work outside of the country. It's been a real challenge to try to work with our university partners, both when I was at UT Austin and now within WebStudent, to try to figure out how do we come up with scalable, interactive, online courses, MOOCs, experiences for these students, and try to have things that at the institutional level, we can scale, we can repeat, we can learn from, we can run as experiments in a disciplined kind of way so that the next time we run the experiment, we learn something new about our own learning, all that kind of stuff. But what's been really challenging is that in each country that I've worked in, we've had very different experiences and very different responses to the environments that we set up. So just a couple examples. I have a course called the Innovation Readiness Series at the University of Texas at Austin. We ran it in 13 different countries over a couple years. It started before they were called MOOCs, but today we call it a MOOC. We ran it in Canvas, because Canvas was by far the most interesting and kind of innovative place to run a course like that. That course was really dedicated towards innovation and entrepreneurship. So the single thing that all of our students had in common, no matter where they were, is that they were capable of coming up with good ideas. They may have already even had a good idea. We were trying to harness that and give them a language of entrepreneurship so that they could express it. And they could tell us what they had, and then we could kind of help them see if we could facilitate it with local incubators in their own countries. And what we discovered was that we could put up forums in Canvas in India, and they went off like wildfire. It was amazing. In fact, it was a problem of abundance. There was so much discussion on them that our teams couldn't handle it. But we could do the exact same number, the exact same kind of structure as students in Russia, and they were very reticent to get into those systems and talk, unless we actually had the right people within the organizations that were supporting us in each of the different locations where we had students, who were then kind of setting the construct for them about how to bring into the conversation. So in India, there was no need for me to actually have somebody go in and seed the conversation organizationally and say, okay, here's how we're going to start. But in order to get the music playing in our Russian cohorts, I absolutely had to have that. In Korea, I was never successful at getting the students to engage in that way. It wasn't going to happen. They wouldn't do it. So, and I don't know why they wouldn't do it. You know, we were running those courses in month-long sprints, and so you only get so much time to collect the data. But what I learned is that no matter how much I put together processes and try to understand how to use the technology in a given space, you know, the students are going to respond in very different and novel ways. And the most wonderful thing about that process was watching where the students actually had their engagement when it wasn't in the environments I provided, and then trying to figure out how do we harness those, how do we bring those in, how do we embrace them, do we want to control them, do we want to tell our administrators about them, because then they'll want to control them, and we kind of like the fact that they're not controlled. You know, starting to deal more with issues of, do those students perceive us as people who are safe to talk to, and people that they want to welcome into their self-forming communities, and then can we bridge and make those interfaces a little bit better. So those are the kinds of challenges that we were trying to solve. The other lesson, I think, in terms of trying to work internationally is that we worked really hard with governments, with large institutions in the countries where we worked, to be able to provide support structures that weren't always obvious. So, you know, especially in something like entrepreneurship, that is a hyper-local discussion. Those small entrepreneurs are going to be going off, and if we've taught them all and they're going to go off and do something, they're going to do it in a very hyper-local way. They can immediately look global, and of course we want them poised for that. But the resources that they're going to need in the first 90 days are going to be the ones that are right there with them. So we were very thoughtful that despite the fact that these were international programs, we needed very, very, very local people. And in each of those, we would spend something like a month training, kind of training the trainer, but basically training local people to understand what we were doing online, so that then they could be the touch points. They weren't going to necessarily do what we were doing, but they were able to kind of be our evangelists and our champions and briefs and the places where we could send those students to when they needed more help. So that's kind of some contextual view experiences, but since I am from Austin, it might be more interesting to talk to somebody else.
Okay. Thank you very much. We're moving to Haruo, who I think is going to
My name is Haruo Takemura, and I am here representing the Japan Open Courseware Consortium. I'm a president of the consortium. But also, my main job function is that professor at the Osaka University. And at the Austin University, I'm a professor at Cyber Media Center. And also, I'm a director of teaching learning support. And well, let me first start the freshman at Japanese University, or student demographics, or the characteristics. Of course, as you know, that they are digital natives, but also mostly taught in a passive way up to secondary education. This is partly because of the entrance examination system here in Japan is solely based on the examination scores, or how they are performing unified entrance exam, and also the university-specific entrance exam is being tested just entrance exam, and they don't much count for the student activity during high school days. So, and so sometimes lost in the first year education, because universities are where they are required to be more responsible for their learning. And also that the overall the course are credit hours. Partially that is because that in engineering or science major, the fourth year of the senior year of the universities are mainly used for research, what they call graduation thesis or something like that. So that they try to get all the credit hours except for that during first year, second year, third year. So that sometimes their overall course is pretty low. At the same time, they are requested to change their learning attitude from passive way to active way. So, well, that's really becoming a major issue here in Japanese, higher education, Japanese universities. Because, and also the Ministry of Education is also pushing us to the direction of active learning or spontaneous learning. So that's why, and let me talk about JOC level. So in resonance to the MIT activity of OpenCourseware, the Professor Miyagawa came to Japanese university and persuaded us to start OpenCourseware in Japan. And they actually, 6 universities started on May 13th, 2005. So 10 years has passed since that. But what happened after that? So currently we have 16 universities in JOC level and 4 affiliates and 5 corporate sponsors. But these numbers and currencies are the maximum number during the period. So that means that we lost some of the universities and also more to the corporate. But JMOOC, Japan Massive Open Online Courseware, they started 2013, and suddenly they gathered a lot of attention from universities, and they have 39 universities, 9 affiliates, and more than 40 commercial companies are joining that. And at this moment, 2,000 courses, more than 2,000 courses are provided as an open courses, but only 59 courses from JMOOC. Obviously, that means that massive MOOC production costs a lot more money. And currently, we have 3 MOOC providers. But at the JOC level side, as they started producing MOOC, the openly available educational material is importance of these materials really increased, and also that getting attention of the people who produce these courses. So at JOC level, we are now talking about modularizing course materials to accelerate reuse of open courseware. And so my idea of the OER ecosystem is that as we have more openly available educational resources, then people can build on top of that online module, online experiences, and that can be also organized as a MOOCs or blended learning in many ways. But the problem is actually we have chasm of unit language, culture, whatever it is, so that even we know that Melo or the OpenStax, a lot of open OER are available in English, but it cannot be directly brought into Japanese educational market. So that how to narrow the chasm or the gap between these things is a very important thing, but also I believe that IT can solve these problems by using machine translation or other AI things. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Harold. He's brought us interesting topics, but we'll have to restrain ourselves until we've heard the next presentation, 2 presentations. Next is from June.
My name is June Reivik. I work at the Norwegian Business School. I used to be a principal in primary and secondary education before I started at the business school. When I'm in Norway, I feel like I move between 2 planets. I live on a planet called Digital Positive, and then I visit sometimes the planet of the Digital Negatives. And I try to make people migrate from the planet of the digital negatives to the planet of the digital positives. But then when I come here, I feel like I moved to a different galaxy. Because the discussions and the focus that is here is so different from the discussions that we have back home. Because at back home, it's like the limitations to technology. When can we use technology? Do we have evidence that it's working? Where is the research? And also it's very much focused on pedagogy. Here I feel it's very much focused on technology. And that the teachers are restricted to implement these amazing tools that the techies are developing. And why don't they understand that these tools are amazing? And I feel like if you start to blame the customer that they don't like your product, maybe it's a product and not the customer that has right. Because if you want to use a tool and the customer says this doesn't work, then it doesn't work because it has to meet some needs. And I feel like much of the technology that is developed for learning is same as new wrapping, because it is. You think of knowledge that is something that is from the teacher and that has to be implemented into the learner. And the part where the learner creates the knowledge in connection with other people, and you have the serendipity where you create new knowledge. If you have a system that is very limited in the view of knowledge, then you don't create new knowledge. You don't have any innovation, you just reproduce existing knowledge. And I think that is a very dangerous path to walk on. So I think much more than focused on tech tools, we need to focus on what can we learn and how can we learn it. Because we have these powerful tools. And what is difficult to change is the mindset. Because we have a mindset that is for centuries been limitation. Technology, learning and knowledge has been something that has been restricted to either they are on printed pages and you have to go someplace where it's located physically, or it's in the head of people, and that is also a limitation. Now it's abundant, and that means that we need to change how we view learning, how we view the learner, how we view knowledge. And I think those debates are very important when we want to talk about technology and learning, because technology opens up so amazing possibilities for us.
Thank you very much, June, and she ended on an optimistic note. It remains to hand over to Michael, who has the unenviable job of finishing it off and still saying something provocative.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm Michael Shanks, and I'm an archaeologist. And I'm here at Stanford as well. The topic in front of us is innovation, which kind of suggests what's coming, what is new. And the other is the international, seeing beyond our local context here. But actually, perhaps that's what it's really all about. How do we understand different specific localities in terms of connecting them under these agendas that we're discussing? My points that I'm just going to make here now can perhaps be summarized under the topic of the politics of what we're doing, which is a way also of trying to emphasize some of the things you've already heard, that it comes down to people. So I'm not really going to be saying so much about the technology side of things, even though we do exist here, in a technocratic utopian world. It's mad. Anyway, the politics of it all. One of the big things I think we'd all agree that's happening is that there are questions about the success or failure of various components of our education sectors. And the one that we have on our table at the moment is the higher ed sector. What we're seeing with the development of learning worlds beyond the university, reaching beyond the university, even though they may be based in the university, is, what can we say, questions being raised about just what does a university, an institution of higher education, offer. And we're seeing models being put forward to distribute learning around much more people, taking it away from just the institutions that have traditionally provided knowledge. But I think you'll all realize too that whereas this may be under a notion, indeed a utopian notion, that we can spread learning around the world, the reality is certain people are going to be making a lot of money out of it. And also the other reality from the point of view of the higher education sector is just what do you think higher education institutions are going to do, and how are people going to react to the spread of learning around the world. The point being that the politics of this is that places like Stanford are going to become even more elite centers, even more centers that accredit a certain minority of people in the world, make them even more distant, more rewarded and valued for what gets called education. And they're all very aware of this. There's all sorts of things going on in universities around the world to tackle precisely what we're discussing here. Under democratization, is that what it really is? Or notions of a market that's going to determine these issues? The politics of it, though, are best seen, need to be seen in the context of global inequality, international inequality. Now, let me now just go to three, what I would call kind of disconnects that I think we're all experiencing and working around. Things that are getting disengaged, disarticulated, disconnected. The one that I'm kind of circling around here is the distinction, the disconnection, growing disconnection between schooling, that is what happens in educational institutions, and education and learning. Now, in the best of worlds, they happen, well, education happens in schools. But if we're seeing a world where going to a university and paying a lot of money to go there, to be in traditional classes, doing traditional disciplines, and that will continue, if that is going to be even more credit to who you are and your standing, class standing in a world, we're going to see growing issues of just what schooling is about. Is it really about learning? What's the reality politics of that? So schooling and education, separate. Issues, therefore, of institutions, and of course that's what we're facing here. What kind of new institutions are there? There's innovation in an international scene. Another disconnect, and again, we're very, very conscious of it, I think, and that's good, is between learning and knowledge systems, which have for so long been seen as context independent. That is, you know, if you do math, it's applicable anywhere in the universe. That's pretty context-free. But we're seeing a realization that what really, really counts and is effective is context dependency. Math as an activity that happens in a certain place at a certain time. It is real-world stuff. So, a disconnect or a shift, an acknowledgement that learning can be context-dependent, and that's when it's really powerful and good. And internationally, that's a requirement for us to be absolutely sensitive to local cultural issues and differences, and have our experiences of learning sensitive precisely to the local. So it's the old one, you know, when you're global, the effective thing is to act locally. Another disconnect, I think, that we're again seeing is around the notion of the discipline. And for a long time, of course, but not actually that long, for a couple of hundred years, our higher education sector has focused on disciplines. And the institutions that we're so familiar with, like Stanford, are institutionally rooted, based on the department as a disciplinary focus and center for learning. We're seeing challenges to that. So the disconnect is saying, hey, you know, disciplines don't necessarily identify with specialty or expertise. You can have non-disciplinary special focus, non-disciplinary expertise. And that disconnect, therefore, is saying, hey, do we need departments in universities? And it's going to be a big issue, but again, I will predict that there will be a retrenchment around traditional disciplines, because that is going to be the value proposition offered to people who are willing to pay, certainly in the United States, and we're seeing it globally, a great deal of money to go to institutions like this to receive traditional learning in the face of the democratization, if that's what it is, of learning more globally. And when you go and study in disciplines, you're going to come out with that kind of accreditation, which makes the inequalities in the world even more entrenched than they are now. So there's an irony, another disconnect. We think we're being perhaps very democratic in reaching out and spreading these things. In fact, I suggest that we're doing the opposite. The danger is that we are all here, in whatever kind of optimistic politics we have, we are actually serving the retrenchment of educational, social, cultural inequality if we don't take care.
That's enough provocation from us. Thank you very much, Michael, for expertly finishing and finishing on time. So we do have half an hour. The way it works is you have to find the microphone. You have to find it will not find you, and ask a question. So in the walk to the microphone, your immediate irritation may subside, and then you can ask a more measured question, can't you? So, who would like to be first? I'm known to pick on people, just like a nasty professor does, and did. Yes, can you also say who you are, in case some of us have got bad memories?
I'm Douglas Makepeace. Donna, I wonder what were the lessons you learned from the Indian students just jumping on the idea and the Russians backing off, and maybe some other countries too?
That's a great question. One that, for as much as I might be kind of consider myself a research scientist around innovation, and innovation is my stream of research, I know nothing about how innovation actually takes place outside of the sphere that I know. And so it's extraordinary what's happening with innovation inside of India, and how that communication is so readily accessible if you know how to get into it. Which doesn't mean it wasn't happening in Russia, but the conversations weren't going to happen in the places where I was able to track them, where I was able to monitor them, where I was able to see them. I absolutely know that they were happening, because out of that program, we had very successful entrepreneurial startups, and there's kind of a legacy of how that's moved forward. It's been about 3 years since we ran that project. But what happened there is that for the most part, everything was absorbed in this kind of, in a way that was dark to me, because it was kind of taken from our systems and absorbed into those organizations, and then transformed. We translated everything into Russian, so it immediately then distributed into Russia, and we couldn't see it anymore. Whereas in India, they wanted the connection, and they wanted to kind of keep closer to our original source. So they actually did those communications and participations in our environment, and it was all very transparent. So I think this leads us to needing better technologies around being able to monitor and understand what's happening with our instructional content. So I can go to YouTube right now. I can see that the MOOCs that I've done on edX that have had 57,000 students are ridiculously heavily North American audiences. When I go to South America, or if I go down to South Africa, I had maybe 5,000 students on the entire continent in Africa. But we had 49,000, at the height of our enrollment of students actually that logged in to that course. So that's a very heavily North American population. And of course, this was my edX MOOC, we were adopters, we were going to reach the entire planet. We totally did not reach the entire planet. The audiences that we thought we were reaching with a mathematical thinking course didn't even know we existed. So I think that doesn't mean that the Chinese students we found out in that class can't access YouTube. There are policy reasons for that. And so what we actually had, one of the students in the MOOC who had hacked his way into it, we went through the ethical discussion of whether or not we should share the hack and let other people know how to, if they were in prohibited regions, to be able to get to it. While we were trying to debate the policy of whether or not it was ethical or not that they were hacking, they meanwhile shared all of this stuff and were screencasting from finding other ways to get to it. Also, not anything we could see and we could learn from it. So I'm very keen to try to figure out how do we build better monitoring systems, sensors, if you will, learning sensors that are embedded inside our instructional material, and that we are very, very happy to allow message to us from wherever those things go. And heaven help them, and I think it's great if they want to hack it and steal it. I would love for that thing to send messages to me back and let me know what's happening with it. I just want to hear. So I think that was the most, in terms of my learnings from it, it was a real desire to try to figure out how would we do that.
Thanks, Donna. I think I'll take one more intervention for the panel on the same topic if anyone wants to. If we can, let's try and keep our answers brief and maybe even a tad enigmatic, because there's always CV afterwards, as in the best clinics. So, any other interventions on this one, or should we move to the next? So, if you move to the microphone, please. Where it's just somewhere nearby.
Yes, I have a question for you, Yuna, as you would probably expect. As many of you may know, Yuna was a member of the MOOC Commission in Norway, and Norway is apparently the only country in the world that I know that has set up such a MOOC Commission that produced 2 reports. What I would like to know is, what have you seen happen in Norway after the reports come out, in terms of has it raised the level of discussion in Norway about online learning, and MOOCs in particular, and has it had an effect on any of the other Nordic countries, because I don't think anyone there have done anything similar. So are you optimistic based on what you've seen since the reports came out, or are the reports gathering dust somewhere and nothing much is happening? Thank you.
No pressure, June. No pressure.
No pressure. Thanks for that question, Eilert. First of all, I would like to say that it's very Norwegian that while other people act, we put down a commission, which we did. And the thing is that it was one administration, a more liberal one, that put down the commission, and when it was finished, we had a more conservative administration. And our current Minister of Education is in the category digital negative. So he says that we have had a time of naive enthusiasm and now it's time to get to work, meaning getting back to the old system. So I think that sets the atmosphere. When you set that aside, of course we have more and more teachers, also in academia, that is seeing the potential and the opportunities. So we have had a few MOOCs that has been launched in our country. But it's, you can discuss if some of them really are MOOCs. So, and the thing about Norway is that we have free education for everyone. And you also get grants and loans from the government to finance your education. So we don't really have the same challenges that you have in the US, where you have a lot of people that don't have access to higher education or can't afford it. Because in Norway, basically everybody who wants gets free higher education. And also we are a small country with 3 official languages. We are only 5 million inhabitants. So the scope for a MOOC in Norwegian is very small. And in English there are so many good MOOCs already. So it's, our situation is kind of special. And that is like, I think, why this report hasn't had the impact, apart from setting things into system and being aware. One of the challenges is, I think the Commission treated MOOCs like a sustaining innovation, something that can be done within the existing system. And we had an interesting discussion in the Commission where we made a difference between students and learners. Students were the ones who were enrolled, and the learners were the ones who were in MOOCs. And I think it's an artificial separation, and it's like the students go for the credits while the learners go for the learning. And that is, so we still have problems with the mindset. And yeah, so yes, not so much has happened.
Thank you. for that answer. Who's going to be next? Yes?
Okay. I have a question. We have lots of great thinking here. I'm just impressed by the amount of brain power in this room and how many deep perspectives people have on a lot of these issues. My question is this: how can we all come together with partnerships to solve big problems together? How can we create action and not just have this be a discussion where lots of great ideas are discussed and nothing more ultimately happens and we all go our separate ways? So my question is, how can we facilitate partnerships and how can we create unions where we all actually work together after this, beyond the scope of a conference, to work together to actually cause change, so we wouldn't just discuss, great, implement it to some minor degree, because I think we can do a lot more together than a lot of separate groups can do together. So,
Thank you. Thank you. This is a tough question, so naturally one looks for Michael to the initial answer, and then the rest can refine it or contradict him if they like.
So,
But they are, come with the man.
I've actually, I'm perhaps, hopefully like some more of you in the room here, impressed by the amount of people who are actually doing stuff here. And I would, celebrate the fact that we are all here talking about issues that matter. What comes after that? Well, I think again we're all seeing. It's not one of my disconnects. It's perhaps one of the connects, which is the enormous potential that there is in alliances across sectors that are traditionally kept apart. The obvious one that we're seeing here is educational institutions and corporations and businesses. That's something that I've found really quite appealing, actually, about being in Silicon Valley. It's not a contrast. I also work over in the Netherlands, and there we work in the city of Rotterdam, which really does pride itself on getting on with things and doing stuff. They see it as their mentality. It's an attitudinal thing, and we've heard some words about that already. There, the challenge, and again, we're not really facing it here because it's a different local circumstances. The challenge is to bridge business, education institutions, and the civic municipalities that are increasingly becoming a key issue in how things happen in the world. I think, again, we're probably all very aware of what you could even call a crisis in nation-state governance, not necessarily government, and the disenchantment people have in national governments the world over. And so I think they're they're opportunistic, really pragmatic alliances between sectors that have traditionally been kept apart in education. Very, very good. So that's what I think.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment from the panel? It's not fun. Well, we can come back to questions later. Who's next? Yes, please. Please say your name as well, please.
Hi, Pedro Hernandez Ramos from Santa Clara University. Thank you for your participation. My question is this. It really has two parts. One, what is the danger from outside the U.S., what I would call educational imperialism? Because so much content is created here and easily available worldwide, that the way of knowing and the content itself is automatically assumed to be normative. And it is the way it is because it's in English, it's on the internet, and it comes from the US. And the second, for Professor Haru and for June, and my opinion for international and for Don too, what are the chances that you see for even relatively small countries like Norway to use MOOCs as a way of documenting knowledge, language, culture at the local level, and use the MOOC platforms as a dissemination strategy to just be known better in your own terms around the world?
Thank you. Can I suggest to the panel that each person should have a go at answering that question from their specific context?
Can I go first? So that as for the view of the current situation from outside of US, especially in Japan, I think that traditionally Japanese professors were interpreter of the knowledge from English to Japanese language, and we've been teaching students. And all the textbook, so that, well, traditionally the textbook in English has been translated in Japanese and taught in universities, and it's a good point that we can teach our students in Japanese language. But now, after the internet, every knowledge is on the internet, and so the professors have to change their role and to educate students in more different ways. And at this moment, still the Japanese university provide our education in Japanese mainly, especially undergraduate. And undergraduate students are not ready for just directly going to the MOOC courses from edX or other Coursera that's taught in English. But at the same time, because the labor market is globalized, to some extent we have to train our students to be adapted to the international labor market, to be able to communicate in English, to be communicated in a Western way of thinking. So in order to do that, I think that we can partially use MOOC courses for our online courses, and also we should be able to produce our courses as an English, MOOC in English or MOOC in Japanese. And by combining these things, I think that there is a lot of possibility that we can enhance our education on campus. But at the same time, documentation. Yes, we've started so that many Japanese universities started to create open courseware, and also that in Osaka University we introduced the lecture capture system. And currently we have 70 lecture theater equipped with the lecture capture system, and we are automatically recording. We had a lot of resistance at the beginning because the professor don't want to be recorded. So that first initially we have a selection of opt-out. So if you don't like to be recorded, just let me know. But most of the professors got angry about that. So that eventually we changed our way to opt-in. But a professor can decide whether the lecture is just recorded for his reference, so just recorded and after reviewing these things be released to student, or maybe recorded and released to student automatically. And by asking this way, 80% of the professors agree to record that. But actually only 20% say that you can release it immediately to students. But I think that by accumulating these data, I think we can gradually accumulate all the educational resources, and some of them can be released as an open license.
Thank you, Haru. Jude?
Your question, especially the first one, have a lot of implications. One I would address first is the funding of education in Norway that is fairly good and fairly special internationally. And we have some laws that limits who can get this funding with regards to where they live and where they study. If we open up for the same funding for students who take MOOCs, all of a sudden we have millions of students that could apply for this funding. And that could totally undermine our total study funding system. And of course that would be a catastrophe for Norwegian students and for the Norwegian economy. Either we would get bankrupt or we would have to abolish the entire system. So that is a really challenge, and one that the MOOC Commission didn't find a solution to. But we need to find a solution if we want to give credits for MOOCs. Because in the Norwegian system, there is no problem if the university wants to say that a MOOC can give credit in a course. We have a system that allows for that. You just need to make the formal qualification and define what they are. So, and also about the cultural imperialism system, we are a fairly open economy. We are a small country. Our children, we don't dub the television, so our children are raised with English-speaking programs and music from small age. So so we are fairly influenced already by especially American thinking and American system, and many people come here on holiday. But still we want to keep the Norwegian mentality, the Norwegian culture, and of course it is a challenge, and one that we haven't solved yet. And one of the problems is that because we have these small environments, that maybe we have a few environments that can compete internationally, but we can't compete on all levels. And of course it is a threat to our education system. So, and when you have the agreements that you can't be protective of due to international agreements, that is a challenge. And we have, at the moment, you have the TISA negotiations. And the impact of that could be hit us really hard. So it's too early to say, but of course, and this is not just something that is a challenge for Norway, it's a challenge all through Europe. So the EU has developed EMMA, that is a multilingual MOOC platform for the various languages. So it's a problem or a challenge throughout Europe.
Thank you. Anyone else like to comment?
Just a short one. I think the question about educational imperialism is a really interesting one. Even just the phrase is a really interesting one. And imperialists aren't well known for listening, just as a rule. And having represented both American and Norwegian entities, I've had the opportunity to kind of see a different reception in places where there are potential notions about whether or not I had motivations one way or another. We can talk on the side over some wine about that. But I do think that if you assume, you know, the other word that you used was normative in part of your, I think that's a really good point. Imperialists do kind of bring a normative sensibility. Of course they're right? We're bringing this to you. And the lessons I've learned is that the way that I perceive the pedagogy that I've actually embedded in my material is likely not going to work in some of the places that I've been. Oddgeir is not here. If he were here, I'd make him say something. But he's talked to me a little bit about the narrative and auditory nature. And as if on cue. Well, he's spoken very eloquently, so we can pick up this conversation with him. But he's spoken very eloquently about the auditory and the narrative nature of learners in East Africa. And so if I'm assuming that I can give them a textbook where things are in a written form and there's a narrative that's intended to be read, then I know that I'm going to have less of an opportunity to actually reach out to those learners. On the other hand, if I consider what that tradition is, it might turn out that I would learn something, and that my 16-year-old who's heavily dyslexic and would rather learn from YouTube than anything else, I might actually learn something myself about how best to reach it. So I do like the fact that you use those terms, and I think they should challenge us, and I think we should be pretty cognizant of them.
Michael?
I think I should remind all of us that universal education was brought in the 19th century as an agent of socialization to counter, let's just say, subversive elements in society, and also to act as an agent of social differentiation, that is, to reinforce the class system. That's why we have our education systems today. The universities similarly brought in the 19th century, taking the modern shape that we have now. I think the imperialism that we're talking about is the reality. It's the way it is. This is not a threat, it's not a danger, it's the way the world is. My field, although I said I'm an archaeologist, and I am, really that's subsumed. It's part of the heritage industry that is now quite global. One of the things we've seen in the last 30 years has been the expansion of a very particular set of attitudes towards culture that we can summarize by saying that you should look after it as heritage. And that attitude and a whole set of apparatuses that go with it, whether they are museums or whether they are academic disciplines such as archaeology, anthropology, cultural anthropology and such, those have been exported globally, and what they've essentially done is homogenized people's pasts. It's the same. And I would just ask you, in broad cultural terms, when was the last time you heard a story, a narrative, that surprised you? And I'm not talking about, plot switches or surprises in that sense. I mean, a narrative that you thought, oh my God, I can't get my head around that, because it is so strange. We've lost strangeness. And I would end with just one point that was made a long time ago, and I think still has a great deal of validity and power, and we should really think carefully about. And it's Marshall McLuhan and his notion that the medium is the message. We're talking about content yet, and look, the medium is what we're putting around in the world today, and it is a homogeneous medium. Where's the customization? Where is the openness to let people define education in an entirely different way, define learning in a different way. How are we going to respect those differences, the diversity, the rich ecology of learning that is in fact perhaps, again, ironically, being reduced in our goodwill?
Thank you. Just on a scope note, the cultural imperialism and education imperialism doesn't only occur in English. As we were sitting in Mexico, we'd possibly see things coming from Spain, and certainly the French have a similar approach. And something to think about afterwards is, might America be the victim of education imperialism one day, rather than being the perpetrator, as I think was the unspoken assumption in the question? Do you want to come back on that, and then we must go to the next?
Yeah, I just want to make an additional comment, because I only need to say 2 words, and that is PISA and TIMSS.
Yes. You've said enough, right. I think you've been waiting patiently for longer. So
Okay, it'll be really quick, just to sort of change the narrative. David Schiffman. So I'm looking at the title, it says International View on the Nexus of Higher Education and EdTech Innovation, and basically what I've heard probably more times than any other word mentioned is MOOC. And so MOOC to me means access, but there's been scant little discussion on how people are taught, how they learn, student collaboration, portfolios, anything else. So I have to believe that internationally there's more going on than just MOOCs. So I sort of, to be a little provocative, throw it to the panel, like what else can you tell us about innovation in the how or the what, as opposed to just access, which, I mean, there is some how and what in MOOCs. I don't want to be totally dismissive, but you get my point.
Okay, who'd like to start? Not, you mustn't mention MOOCs in your answer, other than
Well, from my point of view, MOOC is not just about access, but it's about big data or learning statistics. And I think that many of the universities are also running their own LMS, or a course management system. But I think it's time for us to share these data, learners' data, because the MOOC is the spontaneous learners' data. But we are not sure about what's happening on the on-campus data. Probably each campus has their own data, but if we can compare these things, we can probably, I think, improve our way we teach, way we engage them, so that I think that in Japan, some of the universities are starting to talk about how to exchange the learners' data with using different LMS, CMS, and so that we can learn something from that. So how to anonymize data, how to track each learners based on their characteristics. So I think that, this has a lot of potentiality, and I think that we can do an international collaboration between overseas universities. I think it's a great thing.
It's an interesting question, because I think we talk too little about what you're addressing, about how and what, and very much about technology. And when you talk about MOOCs, there are 2 perspectives, because one is the one of Siemens and Downs about the connectivism. And that is a totally different approach than the MOOCs that started at this campus and developed to all those platforms like Coursera and all the things that happened afterwards. And they started, both of them, with a different approach and a different ideology. But the thing about, and I totally agree with you, that we talk too much about technology and how to customize learning, but we do not spend enough time to address the problem of what shall we learn, how shall we learn it, what is competence, what is knowledge. And I would like, if we could spend more time on those issues, I think the answers in technology would come by itself, because actually we already have so many good tools for using technology for learning and sharing and development. So we are actually not at the moment in lack of tools. We are in lack of mindset and language and how to do it and what to learn.
Thank you. Yeah, please.
I think that without using the M word, when I'm out there, I do see some really interesting experiments. Things like podcasting picking up in South Africa, which I love the idea, because I've watched how podcasting can create deep relationships with an auditory form. You know, it's going back a little bit to radio. So I think that we assume too much about video. In fact, we've kind of polarized. You can either do the correspondence school model, which is essentially let's send paper, or let's put that paper online and it's all ASCII. Super lightweight, you know, that doesn't weigh anything. Or it's these really, really heavy, video-heavy M-word environments. And somewhere in between are new places we could play. You know, just a couple days ago I was looking at an O'Reilly class where, you know, you're playing with the code right there. Well, that's not video, and it's not heavy. It doesn't have to be heavy. We could actually put those on something that was you know, much more consumable for students who don't have access. Put web servers on those devices so the students could collaborate with one another and not have to have broadband. I mean, we could really rethink how we're doing some of this and kind of take a very different Internet of Things kind of approach towards what's happening in learning. And I think that's pushing anyway. We're starting to see that. There's a group called Developers Doing Development that goes into Africa and encourages experiences like this. So there's some really exciting stuff that I'm afraid we don't get to see nearly as often as we should.
Thank you. I'd like to just give time for one final question, and if necessary, give preference to Michael to answer the question without knowing what it is, and assuming it has a fairly brief answer.
Brief questions and brief answers are always preferable. So the brief question is, I'd like to hear your compare and contrast to games and simulations and how those might contribute to inquiry-based learning.
Short answers only, please. Starting with Michael.
One of the things I think we're hearing about technology is that, you know, it's a toolkit and it is a way of enhancing issues, techniques that are at the heart of education schooling. They have been for a long, long time. And of course, games, it's the same. And simulations for me are just, if you like, a particular way of thinking about modeling. And modeling the world is a fabulous way both of coming to understand it, but also acting in the world, because, you know, you're reducing the risk and increasing the opportunity to experiment, try stuff out, explore. So I'm trying to think I think they're part of the educational toolkit. They have been for a long, long while. And again, the technology that we see around us allows us to practice those age-old techniques with greater facility and with more people. And indeed with also often more, one can say, active engagement.
That may be a good point to start. So it remains to join me in thanking the panel and thanking the people for their very pertinent questions. And thank you all.